The Prime Minister has outlined measures to start a very gradual easing of the lockdown in England, while warning of the danger of a second surge of the pandemic. In a televised address this evening, Boris Johnson said it was the right time to update the government's message in England from stay at home to stay alert. But the new message lacks clarity, according to Labour, and the stay at home message is not being replaced in Scotland, Wales or in Northern Ireland. Now, the Prime Minister's conditional plan, as he called it, urges anyone who can't work from home to return to work from tomorrow, but to avoid public transport if possible. From Wednesday, people will be encouraged to exercise as much as they want, but playing sports can only be done with members of the same household. From June, schools in England could see a partial reopening starting at primary level in reception and years 1 and 6. There are no plans for a full return of secondary schools before September, but pupils facing exams next year might get some time with their teachers before the summer. From July, at the earliest, parts of the hospitality industry and other public places might be reopened, and there could be some kind of quarantine for air travellers arriving in the UK, but we have no detail on that yet. The Prime Minister spoke on the day that the latest official figures showed 31,855 deaths from coronavirus in the UK. That's an increase of 269 from yesterday. Well, our first report is from our political editor, Laura Kuensberg.
It is now almost 2 months since
48 days since so many of us tuned in
restrictions on their freedom
to hear the Prime Minister introduce measures not seen in a time of peace.
you've put up with all,
After 7 weeks of lockdown around the country, people watching again
and you have shown the good
from the living rooms and homes where the Prime Minister told us to stay.
Thanks to you, we've protected our NHS and saved many thousands of lives. And so I know, you know, that it would be madness now to throw away that achievement by allowing a second spike. We must stay alert. We must continue to control the virus and save lives.
Although lockdown helped control the disease, it's crippled the economy. So in England, if you can't work at home, ministers want you to go back to help struggling businesses get going again.
We can see it all around us in the shuttered shops and abandoned businesses and darkened pubs and restaurants. And there are millions of people who are both fearful of this terrible disease and at the same time also fearful of what this long period of enforced inactivity will do to their livelihoods and their mental and physical well-being, to their futures and the futures of their children. So I want to provide tonight for you the shape of a plan to address both fears.
That means slowly, in England, limits on exercise will be relaxed. You can sit in the park and play some sports. And a government official confirmed you could meet one person from another household as long as you stick to the 2-metre distance. And if you can't work at home, you'll be actively encouraged to go to work. From June, the ambition is to reopen primary schools for reception year 1 and year 6, but no full return for secondaries before the summer. There could also be a phased reopening of shops. Then in July, the hope is for a limited return of the hospitality industry and opening other public spaces. But this is all dependent on how the disease progresses. And if it flares, restrictions might return.
No, this is not the time simply to end the lockdown this week. Instead, we're taking the first careful steps to modify our measures. If there are outbreaks, if there are problems, we will not hesitate to put on the brakes. We've been through the initial peak, but it's coming down the mountain that is often more dangerous. We have a route and we have a plan. And everyone in government has the all-consuming pressure and challenge to save lives, restore livelihoods and gradually restore the freedoms that we need.
Labour called for an exit strategy several weeks ago, but the leader, watching carefully, was disappointed with what he heard.
What the country wanted tonight was clarity and consensus, and I'm afraid we've got neither. This statement raises as many questions as it answers, and we see the prospect of England, Scotland and Wales pulling in different directions. It's a big gap here for the government to make up.
The UK government's new message, Stay Alert, is designed to cover all sorts of different sectors and advice as the situation evolves.
To help save lives, stay home.
But Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland are sticking to the message, stay at home. The disease is thought to be spreading faster there. Nicola Sturgeon, obviously unimpressed.
I have asked the UK government not to deploy their Stay Alert advertising campaign in Scotland, because the message in Scotland at this stage is not stay at home if you can. The message is, except for the essential reasons you know about, stay at home, full stop. If I say to you my message now is stay alert and you say to me, but does that mean I stay at home or not? I can't give you a straight answer.
We've been following the Rook family in Wolverhampton coping with lockdown.
And it's thanks to your...
Tonight's message gave them some comfort, but questions too.
Just before lockdown, we were due to launch a clothing business. And with manufacturing now on the cards, that certainly gives us something to think about. Disappointingly for me, there was no mention of family, and when we can see people from outside of the household. I lost my dad recently, and I'm missing my mum, and the children are missing their nanny.
This emergency first required a rapid response from the Downing Street desk. This unfolding phase brings pressing questions of detail and dilemmas, not just about his decisions, but also all of ours. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as Laura said there at the end of the piece, the three-step plan announced by the Prime Minister will affect the everyday lives of tens of millions of people in England. And the plan has already triggered lots of questions and demands for more detail. Our North of England correspondent Danny Savage has been to Cheshire to speak to 3 households there.
It is now almost 2 months since the people of this country...
At 7 o'clock this evening, the nation sat down to watch what the Prime Minister had to say.
...of a roadmap for reopening society.
And then digest what it meant to their lives. What changes should they prepare for? What problems does it cause?
I can't see that.
Ian has 3 daughters.
I can't see you going to get on a bus or a train.
The oldest 2 are not in school years earmarked to return to class, but the youngest could be heading back in June.
I think we obviously understand the importance of education for the kids and the social aspect, but we don't know if it's safe to have one going in and 2 not. And how are the teachers going to cope, particularly in reception? That'll be the year going back for us. How do you tell 4- and 5-year-olds to be distant from each other? I think it might be quite scary for 4- and 5-year-olds to be sat around with masks on and to have teachers that have masks on, etc.
Over the road, Titch and Reg were hoping for an indication of when they could see their family again.
I haven't seen the Liverpool grandchildren since January. I haven't seen the Reading children since January.
But they think restrictions should have been extended and are now worried.
We were sort of like, well, let's have another 3 weeks. Never mind the grandchildren. Let's make it safe. I mean, obviously, Reg is in a situation he doesn't want to get it, do you?
I mean, I'm diabetic and I've had 5 different cancers. I don't think that people in this country, in England, will stay at home. They'll start to go out now. But that doesn't mean...
And does that worry you?
It worries me because I'm more likely to get it the more people go out.
Their neighbour Matt works for a logistics company, sometimes at home, sometimes in the office.
The offices we've also got set up so that anyone that has to come into the office, they are at least 2 metres apart. So I think from that point of view, if you've done what you should have done for the past 3-4 weeks, you will be okay.
But there's one big concern.
What message do we give to our staff tomorrow? No, you've got to come into work. They can't, because they can't use anyone. The kids can't go to school, they can't go to babysitters, they can't go to grandparents. So again, it's just confusion.
Behind the front doors of Britain, people are now working out what Boris Johnson's words mean to them. How will their lives work with the new guidelines? Danny Savage, BBC News, Cheshire.
Let's go live to Westminster and talk to Laura, our political editor. Lots of questions, Laura. We heard them on the reports there about clarity. Now, where do you think this statement fits in terms of the picture of the need for clarity?
I think it's very difficult, Hugh. I mean, first and foremost, what this statement does not mean is the end of the UK-wide lockdown. Far from it. And despite expectations that may have been raised or what people perhaps were hoping for, that is not the end of very major restrictions and limits being placed on all our lives. And it was never going to be. What it is, though, in England at least, is the beginning of baby steps of many months of gradual starts of life returning to a different, new kind of normal. But because the lockdown affected pretty much every aspect of our life, that means for every single one of those aspects, the government is going to have to come up with an answer. And a 13-minute speech from one of the desks in Downing Street didn't provide, perhaps could never have provided, every single bit of specific information. But I think, if you like, that has tonight created some very real and immediate questions for people. If they haven't heard from their employer, should they go to work tomorrow? Should people decide to behave differently tomorrow? Should they go out, whereas previously they had been deciding to stay behind closed doors? Now, it's important to say tomorrow the government will publish a 50-page document that should give detailed answers in black and white to many of these kinds of dilemmas. But it feels a bit as if, after political pressure to set out an exit strategy and an understandable desire in government to move towards the next phase, it's a bit like Boris Johnson has given us a rough map of where we might go, drawn in marker, with few of the finer details and contours and place names there for us all to see.
Laura, many thanks again. Laura Kuenssberg there with analysis at Westminster.